What happens when someone's arrogance meets justice head-on? This is the story of Richard Blackwood, a millionaire who thought his wealth put him above the law, and Judge Angela Washington, whose powerful response would teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Richard Blackwood owned Blackwood Industries, a construction company worth over $200 million. His office sat on the 40th floor of downtown's tallest building. Marble floors, gold fixtures, a view of the entire city spread out below him like a kingdom he ruled. But Richard had one fatal flaw. He believed money could buy him anything, including respect, including justice, including the right to treat people however he wanted. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, Richard found himself in Jefferson County Courthouse. Not by choice. He was being sued by the Martinez family for refusing to pay them after they completed work on his newest hotel project. The Martinez family had worked for 3 months, pouring concrete, installing fixtures, painting walls. They had done everything perfectly. But when it came time to pay the $150,000 they were owed, Richard had one excuse after another. The work wasn't up to standard, he had told them, even though his own inspectors had approved everything. "We need to renegotiate the terms," he said, knowing they desperately needed the money. The truth was, Richard enjoyed watching people beg for what they had earned. It made him feel powerful. Carlos Martinez was a hardworking man who employed 12 people from his neighborhood. Good, honest workers who supported their families with construction jobs. When Richard refused to pay, Carlos couldn't meet his payroll. Some of his workers lost their homes. Children went without proper meals. But Carlos wasn't going to give up. He took every penny he had left and hired a lawyer. Today was the day he would finally get justice. Richard strutted into the courtroom wearing a $5,000 suit and a gold Rolex that cost more than most people make in a year. His expensive leather shoes clicked against the courthouse floor like he owned the place. He looked around the courtroom with disgust. "I can't believe I have to waste my time in this dump," he muttered to his lawyer. The bailiff called out, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Angela Washington presiding. Richard glanced toward the judge's bench, expecting to see what he always saw in courtrooms. An old white man who would understand that successful businessmen like Richard deserved special treatment. But when Judge Washington walked in, Richard's face twisted with shock and anger. Judge Angela Washington was a black woman in her mid-40s. She wore her judicial robes with dignity and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every bit of respect she commanded. Richard leaned over to his lawyer and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "You've got to be kidding me. They put a black woman in charge? This is a joke." Several people in the courtroom gasped. Even Richard's own lawyer looked mortified. But Judge Washington had heard worse in her 20 years of practicing law and 5 years on the bench. She simply looked at Richard with calm, intelligent eyes and said, "Mr. Blackwood, please take your seat. We have important business to conduct today." Richard didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and smirked. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. I'm Richard Blackwood. I own half the city. Maybe we should get a real judge to handle this case." The courtroom fell completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Judge Washington set down her papers slowly. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to give you one opportunity to apologize for your inappropriate behavior and take your seat." Richard laughed out loud. "Apologize? To you? I don't apologize to people who got their jobs because of quotas and affirmative action." That's when something incredible happened. Judge Washington stood up to her full height and looked directly at Richard. When she spoke, her words cut through the air like a sword. "Mr. Blackwood, let me tell you exactly who you're dealing with. My name is Angela Washington. I graduated valedictorian from Harvard Law School. I served as a federal prosecutor for 15 years, where I put away corrupt businessmen who thought their money made them untouchable. I was personally selected for this bench by the state Supreme Court based on my qualifications, not my race or gender." Richard's smirk started to fade. But Judge Washington wasn't finished. "I have presided over 3,000 cases in my 5 years on this bench. I have never been overturned on appeal. Not once. I have sent millionaires to prison for tax evasion. I have held billionaires accountable for cheating their workers. And I have absolutely no problem adding your name to that list if you continue this behavior. The courtroom was electrified. Even the court reporter had stopped typing to listen. Richard tried to interrupt. "Now look here. I'm not finished," Judge Washington said firmly. "You walked into my courtroom and immediately decided I was unqualified based solely on my appearance. You assumed that because I'm a black woman, I must be less intelligent, less capable, less deserving of respect than you are. That assumption just told everyone in this room everything they need to know about your character." Richard's face was turning red. He wasn't used to anyone speaking to him this way. Judge Washington continued, "You see, Mr. Blackwood, real power doesn't come from bullying people or flashing your wealth. Real power comes from knowledge, integrity, and the respect you earn through your actions. And right now, your actions are showing everyone exactly what kind of man you are." She paused and looked around the courtroom. "Let me share something with you and everyone else here today. Before I became a judge, I grew up in public housing. My mother cleaned offices at night and took care of other people's children during the day. My father worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table." Richard shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't going the way he had expected. "I studied by candlelight when the electricity was turned off. I walked 2 miles to school because we couldn't afford bus fare. I applied for every scholarship I could find because I knew education was my only way out of poverty." The Martinez family was listening with tears in their eyes. This judge understood struggle. "And you know what, Mr. Blackwood? Every single day, someone told me I wasn't good enough. Someone told me I didn't belong. Someone told me that girls like me from neighborhoods like mine didn't become lawyers, let alone judges." Judge Washington's voice grew stronger. "But I studied harder. I worked longer. I pushed through every obstacle and every insult. I earned my way to Harvard. I earned my place in the courtroom. I earned this seat on the bench." Richard was no longer smirking. He was starting to realize he had made a terrible mistake. "So, when you stand in my courtroom and suggest that I'm here because of anything other than my qualifications, you're not just insulting me. You're insulting every person who has ever worked twice as hard to get half the credit. You're insulting everyone who has been told they don't belong, but proved they do." The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs of approval. But Judge Washington had saved the best for last. "Now, Mr. Blackwood, let's talk about why you're really here today. You're being sued by the Martinez family because you refused to pay them $150,000 for completed work. Work that your own inspectors approved. Work that met every specification in your contract." She picked up a thick folder from her desk. "I've reviewed all the evidence in this case. The contracts, the inspection reports, the photographs of the completed work, the testimony from your own employees confirming that the Martinez family fulfilled every obligation." Richard's lawyer tried to speak, but Judge Washington held up her hand. "I've also reviewed your business practices, Mr. Blackwood. This isn't the first time you've been sued for refusing to pay contractors. In fact, this is the 7th time in 3 years. Each time, you've used your wealth to drag out legal proceedings, hoping people would give up and go away." She opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "Let me read you some names. Thompson Electrical, Chun Plumbing, Rodriguez Landscaping, Williams Painting, all small, family-owned businesses. All businesses you refused to pay after they completed their work. All businesses that couldn't afford to fight you in court." Richard's face had gone completely white. He had no idea the judge had done this much research. "But here's what you didn't count on, Mr. Blackwood. Carlos Martinez didn't give up. He fought for what was right. And today, justice will be served." Judge Washington looked directly at Carlos Martinez. "Mr. Martinez, based on the evidence presented, I find in your favor. Mr. Blackwood owes you the full $150,000 for completed work, plus $50,000 in punitive damages for his frivolous defense of this case." Carlos Martinez started crying. After months of struggle, his workers would finally be paid. But Judge Washington wasn't finished. "Furthermore, Mr. Blackwood, I'm ordering you to pay the legal fees for all 7 of the families you've cheated over the past 3 years. That comes to an additional $300,000. Richard's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. I'll appeal this." Judge Washington smiled for the first time. Mr. Blackwood, you're certainly free to appeal. But I should warn you, appellate courts don't look kindly on businessmen who waste judicial resources with frivolous lawsuits, especially when those businessmen show disrespect in the courtroom. She leaned forward. And one more thing. I'm referring your business practices to the State Attorney General for investigation. If there's a pattern of fraud here, they'll find it. Richard finally understood. This wasn't just about one lawsuit anymore. This was about accountability. This was about justice. As Richard was escorted out of the courtroom, he heard Judge Washington speak to the Martinez family. Mr. Martinez, I want you to know something. What you did here today took tremendous courage. Standing up to powerful people who try to cheat you isn't easy. But you didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for every small business owner who's been taken advantage of by people like Mr. Blackwood. Carlos Martinez approached the bench with tears streaming down his face. Your Honor, thank you. My workers, their families, we can finally pay them. Judge Washington's stern expression softened. Mr. Martinez, you remind me why I became a judge. Justice isn't about the size of your bank account. It's about doing what's right. What happened next was even more incredible. 3 months later, the State Attorney General's investigation revealed that Richard Blackwood had cheated over 50 small businesses out of nearly $2 million. He was charged with fraud and tax evasion. The man who thought his money put him above the law found himself facing serious prison time. But the real miracle was what happened to the Martinez family. With the money from their settlement, Carlos was able to expand his business. He hired 20 more workers from his community. Good job for good people who needed them. Carlos also did something incredible. He started a legal fund to help other small business owners fight wealthy clients who refused to pay them. The Carlos Martinez Justice Fund has helped over 200 families recover money they were owed. And Judge Angela Washington? She became a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever been underestimated because of how they looked or where they came from. The video of her response to Richard Blackwood went viral. Law schools started showing it to students as an example of how to handle courtroom misconduct with dignity and strength. Judge Washington received thousands of letters from young people, especially young women of color, thanking her for showing them what was possible. You taught me that my background is not my limitation, wrote one high school student. It's my motivation. You showed me that intelligence and integrity always went over money and arrogance, wrote another. Judge Washington keeps all those letters in her office. They remind her why her work matters. 6 months after the trial, something unexpected happened. Richard Blackwood requested a meeting with Judge Washington. Not in the courtroom, but in her chambers. When he walked in, he was a different man. Humbled, broken, but maybe, finally, ready to learn. Your Honor, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said in your courtroom, but for who I was as a person. Judge Washington listened carefully. I spent my whole life thinking money made me better than other people. I thought success meant I could treat people however I wanted. I was wrong about everything. Richard had lost his business. His assets had been seized to pay the families he had cheated. He was facing 2 years in prison. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued, but I wanted you to know that you changed my life. Not just with your ruling, but with your words. You show me what real strength looks like. Judge Washington looked at this broken man who had once stood in her courtroom with such arrogance. Mr. Blackwood, everyone deserves a second chance to become a better person. The question is, what will you do with yours? Today, Richard Blackwood works as a construction supervisor. He makes $50,000 a year instead of millions. But for the first time in his life, he treats people with respect. He's learned that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, but by their character. Judge Angela Washington still presides over Jefferson County Courthouse. She still fights for justice every single day. And she still reminds everyone who enters her courtroom that respect is earned, not bought. Her story teaches us that stereotypes are dangerous lies that prevent us from seeing people's true worth. Her strength reminds us that dignity cannot be purchased and justice cannot be intimidated. Sometimes the people we underestimate are the ones who teach us the most important lessons. Sometimes the moment we think we have power over someone is the moment we discover they have something much more valuable than what we possess. Judge Washington's response to Richard Blackwood wasn't just about one rude man in one courtroom. It was about standing up for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong, don't deserve respect, or aren't good enough. What about you? Have you ever judged someone based on their appearance? Have you ever assumed someone was less capable because they didn't look like you expected? Judge Washington's story reminds us that brilliance comes in all colors. Strength comes in all forms. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who has had to fight the hardest to get there. The next time you're tempted to underestimate someone, remember Judge Angela Washington. Remember that the person standing in front of you might just be exactly who you need to teach you something important about respect, about justice, and about what real power actually looks like.